I'll try and stay within 15 minutes, but since I've not written a paper, and since the other panel members have stuck to their time, perhaps I can just extend myself a little bit. When I was given this topic, the first thing which came to my mind was something which the noted Pakistani lawyer and constitutional expert Ezzaz Ehsan always says about Pakistan, which is that the only thing predictable in Pakistan is the past. And if the past is anything to go by, then the future of democracy in Pakistan does not seem to be very bright. It's very iffy, if anything. More so if you consider the enormous strain that the latest democratic dispensation has had to contend with over the last 4.5 years. And one wonders whether, if it was not for the considerable flexibility, pusillanimity, if you will, and compromise which President Zardari showed while at the helm of affairs, whether somebody else in his place could have done something similar, and then whether the democratic dispensation would have survived for as long as it has done. At the risk of sounding facetious, even cliched, Pakistan can be said to have a two-party system. One party is the military establishment, and the other party is the civilian political parties. Each enjoy a 10-year stint in power, give or take a few years. And what is most interesting is that they both call their tenures democracy. Field Marshal Ayub called it basic democracy, Musharraf called it real democracy, or the essence of democracy. The civilians also call what their stint democracy. The other thing which is common to both the military version of democracy and its civilian manifestation is that they both exact what the late and much lamented Benazir Bhutto so evocatively called the revenge of democracy on the people of the country. In recent times, there has been a lot of hyperbole about how much things have changed in Pakistan and how democracy with its warts and all is here to stay. But if there are two things in which the word irreversible should never be used, it is the Indo-Pak peace process and democracy in Pakistan. Both are eminently reversible, and calling them irreversible is nothing short of tempting fate, or the usual suspects, which are common in both the cases. This is not to deny that some things have indeed changed in Pakistan and new factors and players have entered the scene. For instance, there is the emergence of an extremely assertive and activist, even interventionist judiciary. Then there is the media, which has also become a factor to contend with. More importantly, Pakistan has seen a radically different attitude on the part of the main opposition party, actually the leader of the main opposition party, Nawaz Sharif, who seems to have learned his lessons and has strongly resisted any and every attempt to become a handmaiden for an extra constitutional intervention by the military or any other usurper, although he has hobnobbed somewhat with the judiciary. But with no credible political player ready to provide the political fig leaf for an extra constitutional takeover, it has become that much more difficult for the military establishment to overthrow the elected government. The military is also faced with another serious problem that does not allow for direct intervention in the political system. It is overstretched in combating two insurgencies, one which is the Islamist insurgency by the Taliban and the other by the Baloch. There is no great appetite for military rule among the public as yet. This could well be because the civilian interregnum has just about reached its midterm of 10 years, and despite all the anger and frustration over the dismal performance of the government, the army has still not been able to erase the memories of the Musharraf era from the public's mind. And then there is the international situation, which is not exactly conducive to a coup maker. But all these positive developments are not firmly established, as many people would like to imagine. Rather, they are brittle and still in a transient stage, and how they ultimately settle down is uncertain. For instance, will the opposition parties in the future act as responsibly as Mian Nawaz Sharif has done over the last 4.5 years? It is important to bear in mind that many people in his own party were not averse to hobnobbing with the army to see the back of the current government. Will the army continue to suffer its image problems and lack of political support in the future? Will the next crop of generals, many of whom are believed to have been quite keen to see the back of the government by means fair and foul, show the same amount of forbearance that General Kiani has done? Will the judiciary stock continue to be as high as it has been in recent years, or will the financial and other shenanigans of judges and their sons sully the image of the judiciary and bring it crashing down to the ground, making it impossible to play any role in blocking another man on the horseback from usurping power? Will the media continue to be a factor, or can it once again be muzzled or at least made compliant? My own opinion about the Pakistani media is that much as it would like to imagine itself as a player, I think it has more been played rather than be a player. Apart from how effective a role these so-called positive developments play in the survival of democracy in Pakistan, there is also a chance of their becoming the biggest hurdles, if not threats, for the survival of democracy. We should not ignore the ugly reality of power politics in Pakistan, which was succinctly summed up by the former Prime Minister Shujat Hussain, who said that all it takes to mount a successful coup is one jeep and two trucks. And when one jeep and two trucks move, one of the first things that is done is that the judiciary is sacked, or at least those judges who do not swear loyalty to the new regime. Of course, the army does not move in out of nowhere. Invariably, conditions exist or are created that allow for the military to take power, and these conditions are of a nature that it is no longer possible or feasible for the military to pull strings from the sidelines, which they do even otherwise during the civilian phase of democracy. Normally, every military coup is greeted with relief and even celebrated. In other words, not only is it popular, it is also a measure of the unpopularity of the civilian political class. And to that extent, perhaps you can call it a democratic change of power. It is another matter that within a few months or a couple of years, the disillusionment sets in, the regime becomes unpopular, and then is ousted either through an act of God, as in the case of General Zia, or through popular uprisings and street protests, as in the case of Ayub and Musharraf, or through a lost war, as in the case of Yahya Khan. The only saving grace is that when the military takes over, that takeover is an institutional action, but the regime which follows is that of an individual. And that is the reason why you have this transfer of power from civilian to military after every decade or so. Unlike the past, when the real danger to a civilian setup was from the military, now there is a new source of danger, the judiciary. A lot of airtime and newsprint has been wasted on holding up the recent judgment in the Asghar Khan case as having blocked the path of the military from intervening in the political process, directly through a coup or indirectly through manipulating elections. But the fact is that such landmark and historic judgments have been passed earlier as well. Only they never stopped the army when it felt that it had to move in supreme national interest. And if and when the army feels it will move in, regardless of what the judges say or do. Even the current judiciary, which is very quick to insult and humiliate civilian politicians, is very careful in administering the same treatment to the generals. The Ambassador Jahangir Qazi has not come because of his involvement apparently with the Abbottabad Commission, but the head of that commission, Justice Javed Iqbal, is on record as having said that when he was asked in the missing persons case that why don't you summon the heads of the intelligence agencies or the generals who are responsible for human rights violations, said, look, last time we did it, they sent us back home, so please don't expect us to do it again. So one should be very, there are a lot of empty threats which have been made against the generals, but no action has yet been taken against a single serving military officer. The same judiciary, when it comes to humiliating ministers, top officials, does it at the drop of a hat. So they are very careful when it comes to the army, because to quote Stalin, how many divisions do the judges command? While the danger to the civilian-led democratic order remains very much in place, the judiciary is itself becoming the danger to democracy. We've already seen the judiciary having broken new and very dangerous ground by sacking a sitting prime minister on charges of contempt of court. There is a recent judgment in on the government in Balochistan where the court has practically called for the dismissal of the provincial government. And in this particular case, what happens if the federal government resists that observation? Will that mean that the president who is to dismiss that government, will he then become liable to contempt of court and be sacked? As far as the president is concerned, we've seen a new ruling which has come out, both in the Asghar Khan case as well as by the Lahore High Court, on the so-called dual offices, that he cannot hold a party office as well as be the president of the country. Clearly, this judgment is aimed at an individual, a man who is reviled by the right-wingers in Pakistan, Asif Zardari. But the judges who are unelected and who are increasingly acquiring the character of a self-perpetuating mafia, wherein they select themselves without any parliamentary oversight. A judicial commission was formed, but it has been rendered toothless, can now make or break governments. The judicial excesses range from setting the price of sugar to taking suo motu notice of an actress carrying 2 bottles of wine in her luggage, from making the constitution, for example in the judicial commission, to deciding posting and transfers of officers, from determining salaries of policemen to passing rulings on economic policy making. It's an endless series of bizarre interventions. It is another matter that the judges are no less corrupt, nepotistic, politically partisan, averse to any sort of accountability, intolerant of any criticism, and to top it all, as inefficient as any other section of society or institution of state, and therefore their ability to put things right is as suspect as that of anyone else. Apart from the military and the judiciary, there are 2 other very big threats that any sort of a democratic order will confront in Pakistan. The first is the failure of the political class to provide good governance and solve the problems facing the state and society. This is something that creates a vacuum which has generally been filled by the military and now increasingly is sought to be filled by the judiciary. But the failure of governance is only partly the fault of the political class. The other part of the blame must be shared by the military and the judiciary, which have played a highly destabilizing role, keeping the government unsettled, which has then had an adverse impact on its ability to govern what is not an easily governable country in any case. This, however, does not absolve the political class of its glaring failures in managing the economy, law and order, delivering public goods, and every other thing. At the same time, it would be unfair to not appreciate some of the good that the political class has done by settling issues that even military strongmen and judicial fiat couldn't do. For instance, restoring the constitution, devolution of administrative and financial powers to the provinces, thereby addressing a long-standing grievance of the smaller provinces, and making an effort to legislate not always by majority but by consensus. Much of the credit for this should go to Asif Zardari and the PPP, which has tried to break the traditional mold of confrontationist politics by ushering in what they call the politics of reconciliation. One sterling achievement of this current dispensation has been the enormous tolerance it has shown on the always hostile and often unfair criticism directed towards it by the media, and the fact that they can legitimately claim that this is the first government which has no political prisoner or which has not tried to exact political revenge by instituting false cases against political opponents. In a sense, this is what the essence of democracy is. Aside of the governance deficit, the other very big threat to democracy is from the rising power of religious extremists and the growing intolerance in society. The latter is manifest on issues like blasphemy. The former are manifesting themselves in the rise of organizations like the Taliban and other terrorist and extremist organizations like the Jamaat-ud-Dawa/Lashkar-e-Taiba. Instead of becoming a uniting factor, Islam is probably the most politically divisive factor in Pakistan today. The country is split right down the middle on the issue of how to handle extremism. There is no clear idea or plan, much less strategy in place. There is also no clarity on whether democracy is Islamic or un-Islamic, with even Islamists divided on this issue. While the Islamists might not be able to get many votes, the simple fact is that they are not looking for votes. They have enormous street power and use it to exercise a veto over everything which they don't like. They use it to push through with their demands and, more importantly, control the debate and discourse in the media. With things not quite okay, new schemes and proposals are now being floated to change the structure, character and operation of democracy. Most of these are basically aimed at ousting the political class and replacing it with unelected and an unelectable lot which believes that it knows what is best for the people of the country. For instance, a retired Foreign Service official who, not surprisingly, studied at a top British public school has been advocating a restricted franchise system. A top technocrat who was Musharraf's science and education policy wonk wants an Iranian-type council of elders controlled by the judges to vet candidates before an election. Other public intellectuals have started rooting for a presidential form of system because, according to them, the current parliamentary form is broke and not delivering. Of course, none of these guys tell us that, for example, when you have a sort of a gridlock situation or cohabitation-like situation in France or in the US, how does the political system solve that problem? Of course, they've not thought that far. There are also proposals for reducing the term of office to 4 years, which is the average length of time before the public's and the establishment's patience runs out with whichever government is in office. Retired generals are coming out of the woodwork and asking the country to be saved from itself because the people are incapable of judging what is best for them. Some are calling for a Bangladesh model in which a government of technocrats will run things with the help of the judges and generals to put things back on the rails. But I don't think the judges and generals are going to get along very well together because, as Professor Muni mentioned in his talk, just yesterday, I think both the Chief Justice and the Army Chief seem to be have made statements which run counter to that. Needless to say, none of these guys have a hope in hell of ever getting elected, even in a Resident Welfare Association election. What is more, none of them would be caught dead hobnobbing with the great unwashed. And yet, they are so cocksure that they know what is best for the people and the state. Above everything else, it is this patronizing and patriarchal mindset that is the biggest threat to survival of democracy in Pakistan. The future, therefore, appears to be bleak, and I would agree with what Professor Muni said, that the next elections in Pakistan are unlikely to be very helpful in setting things back in order or ensuring the survival of democracy. I could go on, but I think I am.